Asher wondered if he was dreaming as Ethan, rising abruptly, knocked over a cascade of empty liquor bottles that clattered loudly. Ethan's touch, trembling against Asher's impossibly cold skin, seemed to stir a profound sorrow in his eyes. It was jarring to see someone usually so fastidious clinging to him, disheveled as he was, as if to impart warmth. Asher was still reeling from the dizzying descent and the agony that had followed. His vision a swirling grayscale. He questioned if he hadn't died. How could Ethan have reached him so swiftly from 14 stories up, holding him like this? The initial shock and pain eventually receded, and Asher became acutely aware of the intimate position he was in, resting against Ethan. With a sudden surge of strength, he pushed the man away. Asher gasped out, telling him not to touch him, but then a chilling realization dawned. His nostrils weren't flaring, nor was his chest rising and falling. His frantic hand found no heartbeat, no pulse, confirming the impossible truth. He was undeniably thoroughly dead. Death for him wasn't as unbearable as one might expect. Ethan watched Asher's self-examination, then fell silent, the haze of alcohol clearing from his mind the moment he was pushed away. The initial, dreamlike surprise of seeing a lost friend transformed into a mix of caution and doubt. Ethan asked if it was truly Asher using his given name. Asher regained his composure, taking in Ethan's familiar features, then surveying his surroundings. He noted that Ethan looked drastically different, and the space was unfamiliar. Growing up, Ethan Williams had been the quintessential golden boy, admired by classmates, possessing a charismatic blend of charm and a hint of rebellion. His popularity in school was unrivaled. After college, he had seamlessly transitioned into Williams Industries, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, projecting an air of collected confidence. Now, however, Ethan wore a rumpled black shirt, his once crisp collar disheveled, his tie clip askew, the tie itself crooked. His face was gaunt, with dark circles beneath his eyes and a faint stubble. The lingering scent of stale alcohol was almost overwhelming. Hearing Asher's voice, Ethan's eyes blazed with sudden hope. He started to move towards Asher on his knees, calling out Asher's name and asking if he had returned. Asher recoiled, frowning, wondering if this was the afterlife, commenting that seeing Ethan even in death felt like some cosmic punishment for past misdeeds. Ethan, seemingly undeterred, quickly pulled out his phone, illuminating the screen to show Asher a picture of a slender figure from behind. Asher glanced at it, asking who it was. Ethan explained it was Asher but insisted the identity wasn't important right then. With bloodshot eyes, he urged Asher to look at the date. Asher's composure shattered. The year was 2036. He distinctly remembered his fall occurring in 2031. He mumbled in disbelief, his hand unconsciously reaching for a nearby sofa, his legs giving out as he collapsed to the floor. Had a jump from a building somehow fast-forwarded him 5 years? Seeing Asher's confusion, Ethan scrambled up from the carpet, brushing off the wrinkles and dust from his clothes. Apparently embarrassed by the state of the apartment, he began to hastily clear away the empty bottles, instructing Asher to stay calm and seated while he tidied up. Despite being a scion of wealth, generally unaccustomed to such tasks, Ethan moved with surprising efficiency, making the living room presentable in short order. All the while, his intense gaze remained fixed on Asher, like a mute person regaining speech or a dragon discovering a long-lost treasure. Soon, a mug of warm water was placed on the low table in front of Asher. Asher looked up at Ethan, his thoughts racing. He wondered if it was June 20th, 2036, the 5th anniversary of his death, or perhaps even his actual death date. Ethan sat opposite him, hands clasped, confirming that it was. Asher asked if Ethan wasn't afraid of him, a being without breath or heartbeat. Ethan quietly shook his head. Asher speculated if he had fallen into a time warp. Ethan's gaze darkened as he admitted he didn't know. He recounted that Asher's body had been cremated and buried after the coroner's examination, a process he had personally witnessed. Asher scoffed, asking if that meant Ethan hadn't been arrested. Ethan paused before quietly admitting he had turned himself in. Asher pressed him on what had happened next, picking up the glass of water which felt surprisingly warm in his hands. Ethan explained that due to insufficient evidence and the fact he wasn't the one who had drugged Asher, it was ruled an accident. He was released after 5 days. His voice was heavy, and he added an apology. Asher couldn't help but roll his eyes, remarking sarcastically that it was truly a shame. To Asher's surprise, Ethan nodded, took a sip from his own glass, and quietly agreed. The silence that followed was Asher's. Asher observed the apartment, noticing the cold, monochromatic decor of grays, blacks, and whites. Dust gathered in corners, clearly undisturbed for a long time. The overflowing trash can couldn't hold all the liquor bottles, which Ethan had simply piled into a large box. Asher addressed Ethan by name, asking if he hadn't fared well over the years. Ethan looked slightly surprised by the question but admitted candidly that he hadn't. Asher felt a sarcastic retort forming, suggesting that with his rival gone, Ethan should be thriving, yet he seemed just as miserable. He wondered aloud if karma had finally caught up, if Ethan had encountered his own manipulative adversary who constantly undermined him. Ethan abruptly turned his head away, muttering softly that he hadn't. Asher was about to unleash more biting remarks when he paused, seeing a glimmering tear trace a path down Ethan's cheek, finally disappearing into the expensive fabric of his black shirt. It was an unprecedented sight. The boy who used to feign tears to snatch Asher's toys was now genuinely weeping. Ethan then asked Asher if he had truly caused him so much pain. Asher was taken aback by the question. After a moment of silence, he set down his glass, acknowledging that perhaps there had been pain in the past, but it no longer mattered. He reminded Ethan that he was already dead. Asher understood that his death was intrinsically linked to Ethan. Before his birth, his parents had eagerly awaited a child, a symbol of their love. But a difficult birth, coupled with the family company's significant losses due to poor decisions, had left him feeling like a burned-out ember, merely Asher a remnant. He was sickly and quiet, earning his father's disapproval and his mother's sharp resentment. Even their nanny would sigh with pity. They hated him. In stark contrast, Ethan, the son of his mother's close friend, had been born into the Williams family with an abundance of blessings. Every cry brought doting grandparents and parents to his side, showering him with comfort. Every pointed finger led to countless toys and laughter. Asher's mother also adored Ethan. They had grown up together, yet Ethan effortlessly commanded all attention. From childhood, Ethan had a knack for competing with Asher, whether it was over toys, animated shows, birthday gifts, academic achievements, or even opportunities in the family business. Asher was perpetually second best, a silent peak ignored in the shadow of a grander mountain. Despite their nearly identical talents and accomplishments, Ethan received applause, while Asher received only the sting of his mother's grip on his ear, whispering, "Look at Ethan Williams. Then look at you." Asher had only silence to offer. He recalled the charity gala, ostensibly hosted by the Sterling family, which was in reality a thinly veiled matchmaking event for their daughter. A glance from the daughter on stage towards both of them, and then Ethan accidentally swapped their drinks. Asher had been drugged and was resting in a hotel room the family had booked when Ethan burst in. That drugged drink was meant for Ethan, leaving Asher to wonder how different things would have been if it had been. But the outcome was tragically different. Later that night, Asher had woken up, finding life utterly meaningless. He had dispatched a final email regarding work, settled the cumulative expenses of his upbringing, and then, from the window ledge, he had simply stepped into the void. Ethan buried his face in his hands, stifling a choked sob as he mumbled an apology. Asher, raising his eyelids slightly, asked him in a flat, almost rhetorical tone, if taking Asher's possessions truly brought him such immense joy. Ethan shook his head vehemently, his composure finally breaking. He surged to his feet, crying out Asher's name and confessing his love, a love that had always been there. He explained that Asher had always seemed indifferent to everything, never truly acknowledging Ethan's efforts. Ethan had believed that by taking Asher's toys, or surpassing him academically, he might finally capture Asher's attention. He looked up, his tear-filled eyes etched with agony, lamenting that his efforts had been futile. Ethan claimed he only ever took things for a brief moment, intending to return them, but Asher, behind the adults' backs, would simply discard them. Whether it was grades or business ventures, if Ethan ever took the lead, Asher would simply abandon the pursuit, even deliberately submitting blank papers when Ethan later tried to cede victory. He spoke of their intimate encounter and Asher's immediate, headlong jump from the window, asking if Asher had heard his desperate, heartbroken cries from behind him. Ethan voiced his deepest fear, that Asher's disgust was so profound it had driven him to self-destruction, believing Asher saw him as utterly repulsive. Ethan's face was contorted in anguish, tears streaming down, asking if his actions had truly made Asher despise him enough to die. Though Asher was standing right before him, a question that had haunted Ethan remained unspoken. Why had Asher chosen death, and why did he face it with such an unsettling calm? The raw accusation in Ethan's expression shattered the moment his gaze met Asher's cold, unwavering eyes, and Ethan began to tremble uncontrollably. Asher slowly pushed himself up from the floor, turning to lift the hem of his shirt. Finding it cumbersome, he decided to strip it off entirely, leaving only his underwear. Beneath the chilling, ambiguous marks left by death, a landscape of raised scars emerged, raw and jagged, like fractured earth. What Ethan hadn't fully observed that fateful night was now laid bare. Whip marks, burn scars, surgical incisions, and still fading bruises. Asher simply asked if Ethan could count them. Ethan haphazardly wiped away his tears, his lips quivering as he asked what had happened. Asher's voice was disturbingly flat, like a dried-up riverbed, as he asked if Ethan hadn't known what his life was like in the Thompson household. He told Ethan that because he was loved, Ethan had always believed that taking things from others was harmless, merely borrowing, knowing he would always return them. Asher then challenged him to consider what it was like for someone who received no love. He revealed that the toy Ethan had snatched through feigned tears was the only one he had ever owned. Everyone had always insisted Asher defer to Ethan. If Asher refused, Mrs. Thompson would publicly intervene to take Ethan's side. Afterwards, Mrs. Thompson would violently kick Asher and force him to kneel by the door. It was the middle of a summer night when Asher felt an inexplicable chill deepen within him. He slowly put his clothes back on, his body momentarily stiff, then continued to recount untold stories. He described how in school, Ethan had been concerned with Asher not scoring first, while Asher's sole focus was avoiding punishment. Only when their parents acknowledged Ethan's superiority could Asher find temporary reprieve. In the corporate world, Asher initially had no say in dealings with partners, and eventually he ceased to care at all. He told Ethan that if he wanted to know about the company, he could, as their parents had never intended to hand it over to Asher anyway. Asher looked at Ethan's stunned face and felt a strange sense of liberation, almost exhilaration. He rhetorically asked Ethan if it wasn't ironic that he had toiled endlessly from the age of 20, only to die before his 27th birthday. He revealed that he had overheard, at 25, their parents planned to transfer all shares to Ethan as a birthday gift, meaning Asher had worked for them for 2 additional years without any real stake. 7 years of his life only to end up with nothing. How could he not harbor resentment? During those nights he needed medication to sleep, he'd endlessly ponder the meaning of life. Some claimed life was a divine gift, every step predestined. Asher, however, wondered if the celestial being orchestrating his fate was merely an intern, stamping approval on a bitter box of chocolates instead of the sweet ones. Ethan retreated a couple of steps, murmuring apologies, unwilling to accept what he was hearing. He questioned Asher about the long suffering of his aunt and uncle after his death. Asher found it peculiar, scoffing at the notion that his parents had only begun to grieve and love him after he was gone. He wondered how ridiculous it sounded to claim such things when they had shown him no affection in life. Before he could continue his tirade against Ethan, a sharp, urgent chime echoed in his ears. Asher clutched his forehead, feeling as if his skull might burst. Ethan rushed to steady him, asking what was wrong. The chime faded, but a persistent ringing remained. After a while, Asher removed his hand, stating that his time might be running out. He told Ethan that he didn't understand why his spirit had crossed time to be here. Perhaps the afterlife wouldn't accept a soul burdened by such strong, unresolved feelings. In the quiet apartment, the distinct beat of Ethan's heart skipped beside him. Asher suggested they take a walk, as they had known each other for years, and see if there was a way for him to find his rightful place. Ethan agreed. Asher couldn't comprehend how or why his post-mortem journey had led him here until they stepped out into the daylight. He then recognized the apartment complex as the very one he had moved into after leaving the Thompson family home years ago. Ethan lived next door, though their units had different layouts. Regrettably, Asher had never paid attention to his neighbors, constantly immersed in his corporate responsibilities, always striving to keep pace with Ethan. Even now, seeing the familiar doorway and the corner, he merely cast a detached glance before looking away. This place wasn't truly home. At best, it was a transient refuge. Asher and Ethan descended the stairs as the sun was just peeking over the horizon. Asher had wanted an early start, curious if his current, living dead body, mobile yet devoid of vital signs and seemingly deteriorating, could withstand direct sunlight. The early morning light offered a cautious test. It turned out he could endure the sun's rays without major issues. He changed into an old hoodie and jeans Ethan had kept for him, garments Asher could barely recall ever wearing, surprised at their relaxed style. The once lively child had been forced into a persona of strict etiquette, becoming the poised and reserved Asher, flawless in social interactions. Asher stretched, looking at the sky, noting the pleasant weather. Ethan, also in casual attire, asked what Asher wanted to do. With distant high-rises piercing the skyline, Asher scanned the area, pointing towards the riverfront shops and the public square, suggesting they go for a walk. Ethan nodded, turning to get his car. Asher stopped him, pulling him back and insisting they walk instead. Ethan looked hesitant, his gaze sweeping over Asher as if questioning his ability to walk in his current state. Asher shot him a glare, telling him to stop looking at him that way, asserting that even though he was dead, his physical condition was still quite good. Ethan mumbled, saying he was simply worried Asher might get tired, or worse, disintegrate or vanish entirely. Asher found it incredible that his sworn enemy had seemingly transformed after his death. No longer the taciturn, smug rival who gloated after taking Asher's possessions. Asher bluntly stated that Ethan needn't worry about him. Ethan just uttered a simple "oh" and fell silent again. After they had walked a considerable distance out of the complex, Asher suddenly asked Ethan if he wasn't curious why they were going shopping first. Ethan admitted he was curious but kept his focus on their path, clutching Asher's sleeve tightly, afraid he might disappear at any moment, and explaining his fear of upsetting Asher. Asher was almost amused, remarking on Ethan's newfound fear of his anger, a concept entirely alien to their past dynamic where sarcasm was his default around Ethan. Usually, Ethan would feign a pitiful expression, lowering his gaze and saying he would be scared. However, this time, Ethan stopped abruptly, causing Asher to stumble. Once steady, Ethan simply apologized. Asher felt a surge of annoyance, a black line forming in his vision, complaining that he was tired of hearing apologies, having listened to them all night. With that, he pulled his sleeve from Ethan's grasp and walked on. He felt his time was limited and couldn't be wasted on hearing more apologies. Ethan pursued him, quietly saying it wasn't enough. Asher retorted that, of course, a few apologies wouldn't fix anything, but he was incredibly vexed. He wished he could lock Ethan out of the room like last night, cover his ears, but they were outside. He added that countless people owed him apologies, and he couldn't possibly listen to them all. The mall seemed unusually empty that day. Curious, they wandered from the first floor upwards, and the reason for the quiet soon presented itself. 2 security guards stepped in front of them, dutifully informing them that the mall was temporarily closed to the public today. Asher asked if someone had rented out the entire place. One guard began to speak, but the other quickly sized them up, stopping his colleague and simply gesturing for them to leave. Ethan seemed poised to resolve the situation with a more direct approach, but Asher stopped him, saying it wasn't necessary, that they were just looking, and an empty mall wasn't much fun anyway. Ethan, halfway to retrieving his wallet, put it back, then suggested they check out the lively Grand Central Market nearby. So they left. Asher looked back at the architecturally impressive mall, offering a silent goodbye in his thoughts. It was his first independent venture, every design drawn by his own hand. Before his death, he had transferred ownership to the only student he truly trusted. Knowing it was still thriving, even inspiring private rentals, brought him a sense of peace. It meant his student, Olivia, had found the freedom and resources to build her own life. "Excuse me, ladies, but you..." 2 disheveled, well-dressed women rushed from inside the mall, grabbing the security guard's arm, their eyes wide with frantic desperation, demanding to know if 2 men had just been there. The guard, startled, paused before confirming that yes, 2 men had just left. The one next to the man in black, "Did you get a good look?" she pressed, her voice trailing off. The other woman quickly pushed a phone into her hand, urging her to show the picture. "Yes, yes," she exclaimed, taking the phone and pointing to a photo. "Does he look like this?" The guard's spine tingled as he glanced at the image. He wouldn't look too closely, only admitting it bore some resemblance. The woman was insistent, demanding he meticulously point out the differences, but the guard, waving his hands dismissively, claimed he hadn't gotten a clear look at the men earlier. After finally seeing the 2 high-profile women off, the apprentice guard asked his mentor what photo they had been shown. At the mention of it, the senior guard shivered again, then sharply cuffed his apprentice on the head. He grumbled under his breath, but aloud, he simply told the apprentice not to pry into customer affairs. The apprentice rubbed his head, then heard his mentor advise him to put some salt in his pockets when he went home that night. When asked why, the guard, unwilling to elaborate, only muttered that the photo on her phone was in black and white. "A memorial picture?" the apprentice whispered, a cold gust seemingly passing behind him. The market, bustling with activity, offered a vibrant alternative, a perfect place to find some local flavor. Asher often mused that if he hadn't been born into the Thompson family, but into an ordinary household, even without parents, his life would have been profoundly happier. He imagined opening a small shop, selling flowers or pastries, then, after closing, diving into the labyrinthine street food stalls, browsing and eating without the pressure of finding a partner, simply enjoying life. But each time he woke to the familiar ceiling, and his phone displaying daily performance metrics, he was reminded that there were no if-onlys. Asher asked Ethan if he had ever considered what he would do if he weren't a Williams. Ethan, carrying a bag of street tacos Asher had impulsively bought, hesitated before answering, instead asking Asher what he would like to do. Asher thought about opening a shop. He stopped at a cotton candy stand, requesting 2 blueberry ones. The vendor expertly grabbed a stick and spun the sugar, confirming the order and the price. While waiting for the cotton candy, Asher elaborated on his fantasy. A small bakery or a flower shop. Nothing grand. He'd source early in the morning, open during the day, and spend his evenings at home. He mentioned that fortune tellers at his birth had predicted a weak familial bond, suggesting that even outside the Thompson family, he probably wouldn't have had parents, which he considered a relief, as no one would then pressure him to find a partner. Ethan listened quietly, accepting the cotton candy from the vendor without complaint, following Asher deeper into the crowds. Asher felt as if he had held it all in for too long. No one had ever listened to him like this before. He found himself pouring out the pent-up regrets of his heart to the very person he had once detested. Asher recounted the early days of taking over the company. He had been negotiating the acquisition of Miller Corp from the family who had once driven the youngest Hayes heir to ruin, but the talks had stalled. Frustrated, he'd gone out drinking and gotten completely inebriated. He then recalled buying a gourmet slider, eating one, and then pressing the rest into Ethan's hand. He explained that in his drunken state, he had wandered through every single shop in this area, asking each owner if their storefront was available for lease or sale. Ethan softly inquired if he had faced any difficulties. Asher chuckled at the question, remarking that they were lucky no one had called him crazy, as no one in their right mind would ask a successful business owner if they wanted to sell. Ethan's lips curved into a smile, agreeing. Asher rarely saw such an uncalculated, guileless smile from him, or perhaps he had never truly noticed it before. He was momentarily stunned. In the past, Ethan's mere presence, even from a distance, would make Asher want to cleanse himself of bad energy. The thought of leisurely walking with him, let alone pouring out his heart, would have been unthinkable. Asher called out Ethan's name. Ethan, having guided him away from the denser crowds, asked what was wrong. Asher looked at him, commenting on the strangeness of their situation, walking the streets together. Ethan seemed almost singed by Asher's gaze, lowering his head and averting his eyes as he quietly stated there was nothing strange about it, and that he had always wanted to get along with Asher. Asher simply smiled, continuing their stroll through the market. He understood that Ethan's words were too late, his actions too delayed. For the rest of the afternoon, Ethan dutifully carried their purchases, accompanying Asher from the south end of the market to the river's edge. They had grabbed a quick lunch at the market, and by the time they reached the riverbank, the sky was awash in the hues of a spectacular sunset. Asher sat on a bench, rubbing his overly full stomach. He expressed how utterly delightful it had been, admitting he had never eaten so indulgently before. Ethan heartily agreed, nodding weakly, saying he would never eat so much again. They exchanged a look and a shared laugh. The sun, a perfect orange orb, steadily dipped towards the horizon, and the vibrant colors of the sunset began to fade. Asher reflected on the day, concluding that experiencing such freedom and joy even after death made it all worthwhile. Ethan's smile gradually disappeared, his expression becoming somber as he softly asked Asher why he had chosen death. Asher, a languid smile gracing his lips, turned to him, his voice relaxed, stating he had nothing left to live for and was tired of his life. He asked if it wasn't for the best, believing everyone would be happier with him gone. The topic of life was always heavy. Asher felt he hadn't trivialized his life, nor had he made a hasty decision. Ethan shook his head, saying he wasn't happy and didn't believe Asher truly had no regrets about leaving the world. He reminded Asher that Sunrise Emporium was Asher's creation, later given to the female student he had mentored. He asked if Asher's visit today had been to check on her. Asher admitted it was, saying he felt at peace knowing she could manage Sunrise so effectively and had her own agency. Ethan then inquired what if she sold Sunrise. Asher simply stated his belief in her. Ethan, looking defeated, let out a cynical laugh, asking why Asher would trust a student he had mentored for only 3 years, yet not believe that Ethan, who had grown up with him, would genuinely grieve his death. Asher gave him a pointed look, asking why he was speaking with such bitterness, and if he really expected Asher to trust him. Ethan sighed, stating that his desire to get along with Asher was no lie, but Asher had never given him the chance. He observed that once Asher decided something, nothing could change his mind, much like his perceived hatred for Ethan and his unwillingness to grant any opportunities. Asher questioned this assertion, standing up as his vision began to blur, seemingly receding. He claimed he had given Ethan many chances. Ethan looked bewildered, asking how that could be. Asher then asked if Ethan had ever seen the coroner's report. Ethan's gaze darkened as he admitted he hadn't. Asher gripped the armrest of the bench, his sense of touch almost gone. He decided they still had time, suggesting the report's copy must be at the Thompson family estate, and it was time to go. What needed to happen would happen. The Thompson family mansion was nestled in Oak Haven Estates, the same upscale suburban development where Mrs. Thompson and Mrs. Williams, once inseparable best friends, had chosen to settle after marrying and getting their licenses on the same day. Ethan called a driver to pick them up from the river and head directly to Oak Haven. The car ride was somewhat tedious, and the driver, sensing the heavy atmosphere, idly cycled through radio stations. A nighttime news brief mentioned that Metropolitan University's Tech Society had launched its time capsule reboot project 3 days prior, with 108 volunteers participating. The organizer, Metropolitan University alumna Olivia Hayes, reportedly stated that her most respected mentor had also contributed to the project. As night deepened, both Asher and Ethan suddenly opened their eyes. The driver announced they were nearly there, as the familiar sight of 2 elegant villas appeared in the distance. This area, once brightly illuminated to please the 2 women, now appeared dim and neglected. Asher, puzzled, asked if the Thompsons were away. Ethan checked his watch, replying that they should be home. He explained that after Asher's departure, the exterior lights had never been turned on again. Asher asked why. Ethan turned to him, his deep, dark eyes holding an unreadable expression. He reminded Asher of a time he had fallen into the garden pond and Ethan had rescued him, after which Asher had suffered a severe corneal inflammation. Ethan added that the coroner had casually mentioned that individuals who had experienced such a condition often developed photophobia. Mrs. Thompson, he concluded, fearing Asher's anger at coming home, had simply left all the lights off. Asher wondered if this was some form of posthumous compensation. He closed his eyes, scoffing that the lights had still been on the day before his death. Ethan softly called Asher's name. Before Asher could respond, Ethan pulled him into a powerful embrace. Caught off guard, Asher's hands rested against Ethan's chest, feeling the vibrant thrum of a beating heart beneath his ribs. The hug was tight as Ethan buried his face in Asher's neck, exhaling deeply. Ethan stated that he was sorry, admitting he had known Asher preferred dim lighting but had never realized it was due to eye discomfort. He acknowledged saying sorry too many times but insisted each apology was genuine, for everything in the past. Asher swallowed, unsure what to say. His emotions were a jumbled mess of hatred, resentment, and a strange flicker of gratification. Part of him felt he should forgive Ethan, that Ethan had also suffered. Another part thought it was too easy for him. Everything Ethan touched felt frigid, a cold that invoked despair even in the height of summer. Ethan couldn't warm him. The moment this realization struck, Asher felt as though the very sky would collapse. The driver stopped. Asher lowered his gaze and pushed Ethan away. Ethan quickly retreated, as if the person who had just desperately wanted to meld Asher into his very bones was someone else. Ethan stepped out first, extending a hand to Asher. Asher stared at it for a long moment, ultimately choosing not to take it. Before they even reached the door, the Thompson family mansion's imposing entrance swung open, and 2 figures rushed out. My vision blurred further, and it wasn't until they drew closer that he could distinguish them. Once he did, his usually impassive lips tightened instantly, and he stepped back, halting the approaching couple. Mrs. Thompson's eyes were bloodshot, and she clung to her husband's arm, asking frantically if he had seen clearly, if it was truly Asher. Mr. Thompson, though appearing calmer, had hands trembling like sieves, unable to stop shaking. He confirmed it was Asher, that Asher was back. Asher addressed Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, introducing himself as Liam Chun. Ethan's eyes subtly shifted, watching Asher for a long moment before introducing Asher to the Thompson couple. He explained that they had mistaken Liam for someone else, and Liam was his friend, whose sister, Olivia, owned the department store. Mrs. Thompson, her face a mask of disbelief, suddenly burst into tears, asking how it could be that he looked so much like Asher, even sounded the same. She pleaded, asking if Asher no longer wanted his mother. Asher simply suggested she contact his sister, who would be able to tell her. Ethan smoothly stepped in front of Asher, saying that they had come to discuss something with them. Mr. Thompson patted his wife's shoulder, ushering them inside. He suggested they enter and talk. The interior lights were also dim. Asher asked Mr. Thompson if the lights could be brightened, as he couldn't see clearly. The couple froze, exchanging a glance, as if doused with cold water. Mr. Thompson gestured to the butler, who quickly illuminated the entire living room. Sitting on the sofa for the first time as a guest, Asher suddenly understood why characters in novels found comfort in lounging on them. They truly were soft and comfortable. For over 20 years, he had never once sat on the living room sofa, only having memories of hurrying through or standing to be reprimanded. Mr. Thompson offered tea, then addressed Ethan, who, accustomed to the older man's solicitous care, directly inquired if a copy of Asher's coroner's report from that year was still available. At this, Mrs. Thompson's eyes welled up again, and she glanced at Asher. Seeing his unwavering gaze, she quickly looked away. She rose to retrieve it. As she left, the Williams parents entered, also pausing in surprise at Asher's presence. But they understood that death was final, and simply nodded to Asher before asking Ethan why he and Mr. Chun were suddenly investigating Asher's autopsy report. Ethan vaguely explained that some of Asher's work was related to Olivia Hayes's research, necessitating a review. His words usually carried weight, and Mrs. Thompson soon handed him a thin stack of papers. Ethan took them, his eyes scanning rapidly. Upon seeing the words prolonged state of depression and anxiety, his hands clenched tightly around the documents. He steadied himself and continued reading. Deceased routinely took psychiatric medication, specifically fluoxetine HCl capsules, 20 milligrams 3 times daily, esopicolone tablets, 4 milligrams once daily, buspirone HCl tablets, 30 milligrams 3 times daily. Cause of death attributed to cranial trauma from high fall, with accidental fall due to depressive episode not ruled out. A devastating shockwave hit Ethan's mind. The foundation of his understanding, which had supported him all this time, suddenly crumbled into a pile of ruins. Ethan stood amidst the wreckage, utterly lost, a profound despair and agony washing over him. He realized he had been wrong all along. Asher hadn't jumped because he was disgusted by their night together. Asher had genuinely reached his breaking point. Years of psychological torment, Ethan's constant competition, and his parents' relentless disapproval had transformed Asher from a child who dared to argue and protect his toys into an empty shell. Easily manipulated, needing only a spark to shatter completely. They say truly desperate and heartbroken individuals don't rage or weep uncontrollably, but instead fall into a profound, death-like stillness. Ethan felt like a violin string snapping. The papers slipped from his trembling fingers. He softly asked Asher if it was true. Asher countered, asking if Ethan believed a coroner would joke about such things. Ethan stood, attempting a smile that failed, his hands trembling, then his entire body. He asked when it had started. Asher's gaze remained utterly flat, observing that Ethan already knew, having secretly followed him to the clinic every month. Ethan shook his head, unable to face the truth, and a large tear rolled down his face. He confessed he had assumed Asher was visiting Olivia, believing Asher was romantically interested in her. Olivia was an orphan who, after earning a college scholarship, was involved in a car accident. The welfare agency, only responsible for her until she turned 18, refused to cover her tuition or medical bills after the accident. The hit-and-run driver was never found, and she lay alone in a hospital corridor, awaiting death. Perhaps fate had drawn similar souls together. Asher had stumbled upon her by chance after taking a wrong turn on the hospital floor. Asher shook his head, saying Olivia was far stronger than he was. Both sets of parents watched as the once imposing Ethan seemed to collapse like a mountain. his perception apparently torn in two, and they, too, began to weep. Mrs. Thompson's gaze had been fixed on Asher since he began speaking with Ethan, but she dared not approach. Just as Asher, in his youth, had only dared to glimpse, never truly hope for, his mother's affection. Asher told Ethan that his attempts at tracking him had been clumsy, so much so that he didn't even bother to change his car. Yet, Asher continued, Ethan had always believed he was perfectly hidden because he was never directly confronted. Asher asked Ethan if he had ever seized any of those opportunities. Ethan crumpled to the floor before Asher, the color rapidly draining from his face, as if plunged into an ice bath, chilled to the bone. The Williams parents immediately rushed to his side, asking what was wrong. Asher withdrew his gaze and asked the butler if a guest room could be prepared for him to stay the night. The butler looked to Mrs. Thompson, who nodded, and then led Asher to an unoccupied room. Once the door closed, Asher raised his arm. The disintegration had begun. He didn't want to spend his last moments in front of people who, from now on, would be irrelevant to him. Every anxious night of his past had felt interminable. Now he simply wanted to sleep one last time as an individual. In the Thompson family living room, both sets of parents comforted a distraught Ethan. Mrs. Thompson, on the verge of breakdown, asked Ethan if the person was indeed Asher. Asher, meanwhile, had no desire to acknowledge them. Ethan's blank expression fractured almost imperceptibly as he countered whether it truly mattered who Asher was, stating that Mrs. Thompson knew better than anyone. At that moment, the number of desolate souls in the room grew to 5. After sitting in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity, Ethan seemed to whisper something, so faint that even his own parents couldn't quite hear it. Mrs. Thompson, however, caught it. He had asked why regret only came when it was beyond repair. She was struck as if by a physical blow, her inner cries silent, replaced by a strange, hoarse gasp. Tears streamed uncontrollably as she clutched her friend's sleeve, asking what she had done, what she had truly done. Why had her postpartum depression persisted for over 20 years? Why had she treated her own child like an enemy? Ethan raked a hand through his hair, springing up from the sofa, his eyes bloodshot and raw. He spoke in a hoarse, suppressed voice, addressing Mrs. Thompson directly. He recounted how Asher had been forced to defer to him from childhood, how his academic achievements had to surpass Ethan's to avoid beatings. He remembered forcing a non-swimming Asher into a dirty pond, and though he had rescued him, Asher was then locked in a room for 2 days by Mrs. Thompson, almost blinded by corneal inflammation. He revealed the absurd truth that Asher had overheard their plan to transfer the company, the fruit of Asher's years of hard work, to Ethan as a 25th birthday gift. The tears now flowing from Ethan's eyes seemed to burn red. He declared that Mrs. Thompson, he himself, and everyone else in that house were the culprits. At that moment, the doorbell rang. The butler hurried to answer it, returning shortly with a complex expression, carrying a large oval object. He announced that it appeared to be a capsule. Ethan, however, rushed forward, tearing it open impatiently. He realized he should have known. Given Asher's close relationship with Olivia, Asher must have been involved in the time capsule project. Inside the capsule was a simple music box and a medical report. After a burst of jarring static, the music box began to play, and a voice, undeniably Asher's, began. To my future self, 5 years from now. Everyone in the room stiffened. I am Asher, born into a family that once cherished love. But I became the ashes of their passion, their ardor long extinguished. It's hard to believe parents could hate their child so intensely, as if I were an enemy they had pursued across 2 lifetimes, finally reborn into their household. My life consisted only of studies and ceaseless disapproval. Oh, and a rival named Ethan Williams. He was truly, genuinely detestable. When we were young, he'd try to take my toys. If I refused, Mother would kick me. Seeing him with my treasured possession, my aversion deepened, so I threw it away. But that was all the love I had, and when I tried to reclaim it, the toy was gone. I was heartbroken, but there would be no second toy, no more love. At 8, he insisted I swim with him in a dirty pond. I was reluctant, but Ethan called us friends, and I relented. We both fell in, and he saved me. Mother, predictably, was furious, scolding me for my carelessness, locking me, soaked in my room. That was my first taste of death. My meager gratitude for Ethan quickly turned to resentment, then hatred. I hated him for dragging me into that pond, for robbing me of the right to look directly at light. I hated him for snatching my first-place achievements, returning home only to be whipped until I was covered in wounds. I hated him for effortlessly taking my triumphs, forcing me to perpetually concede to him for my own safety. And simultaneously, I hated my parents for gifting me such a wretched existence. 2 years ago, I finally gained the board's recognition. I was no longer merely a trust fund heir. Yet, I happened to overhear my parents planning to transfer all my rightful shares to Ethan as a 25th birthday gift. Enraged, I moved out. Sometimes, I truly wanted to ask God if humanity was inherently evil, born to atone, destined for a life of suffering. But why did it seem that only a select few struggled and drowned in such a bitter sea? Let's change the subject. Olivia would be upset if she overheard this. Olivia was a young woman I met by chance after taking a wrong turn on my way to a psychological counseling appointment. I first saw her lying in a hospital corridor, her eyes holding the same distant indifference I felt towards life. As we got to know each other, I realized it was a deep-seated apathy. Perhaps it was fate. Since my life had already begun with a box of bitter chocolates, all I could do was help her find a sweet one. We shared a similar pain, and I wanted to help her. I paid for her medical bills and tuition and hired professionals for her rehabilitation, knowing how much girls value their appearance, fearing she might not walk gracefully again. After that, I began teaching her about entrepreneurship, business management, and networking in college. I discreetly provided her with some storefronts, which meant little to me but were her means of survival in this imbalanced world. It was a small gift from me, her mentor, to my only student, despite being only 2 years her senior. 5 years from now, I still worry about her. Is she well? Is she still skipping meals to save money? Olivia is a resilient girl. I admire her courage to persevere. If she isn't doing well, please guide her differently. Don't let her become dependent. She needs to walk her own path. But don't use methods that inflict too much pain, like how Ethan and I were brutally taught independence and secrecy. As for me, I've confirmed my surgery plan. 1/3 of my liver will be removed. My doctor said liver cancer is prone to recurrence, so who knows what the next 5 years will hold. Are you doing well? Regardless, please try your best to live fully. But if my body and spirit have decayed, and my last vestiges of dignity, freedom, and purity are also destroyed, then I respect any decision you make. Life is a river flowing inexorably onward. We cannot stop its source, but we can alter its course and its end. Whether it becomes a lake, an ocean, a dry bed, or a rushing torrent, time will provide the stakes, and you will cast the dice of destiny. The ultimate decision is yours. One more thing I'm worried about. When I was 22, I found a newborn kitten. I couldn't take it home, so I secretly housed it in the neighborhood. Its name is Muffin, a white cat with golden eyes. Cat abuse was rampant back then, and I had no other choice but to put it in a carrier with its favorite treats and food, leaving it at Ethan Williams' doorstep. Ethan, for all his faults, had some kindness in him. But I've always worried. 5 years from now, please find Muffin, no matter the cost, and bring it home. While you're at it, check on Ethan. See if he's still alive, use that as motivation. You need to be alive, at least, to surpass him. Just to say, life's trajectory is unpredictable, but I look forward to seeing you again. Recorded January 12, 2031. Another voice then began, Olivia Hayes here, Asher. I'm doing well. Hello, Asher, 5 years from now. This is Olivia. Please live well, and wait for the tides to wash away the sand before this letter, crossing time, is opened again. I look forward to the day we open it together. You can complain about your rival to me again. Complain about the owners who wouldn't sell you their shops back then. I look forward to seeing you again, Asher. Asher awoke at 5 in the morning. Outside, a faint light already illuminated the horizon. He vaguely remembered it was the summer solstice. Muffled sounds came from outside the door, indistinct voices. He pushed the door, but his hand passed right through the handle, and his body slammed heavily against the door. His vision was now a swirling blur, the chiming in his ears growing distant then near. He struggled out of the guest room. As he drew closer, the voices in the living room became clearer. It was his voice. It was the seed he had planted in the past. He leaned on the staircase, listening to Olivia's final words, feeling a sudden clarity, like a flame igniting in the long night. He had been dead for a long time, buried in the past, yet truly dying in the future. His intense longing and regret had sealed his soul within that capsule, allowing his spirit to cross time, arriving 5 years later. Hatred, revenge. None of it mattered anymore. He had entrusted all his hope to the capsule, simply to glimpse the small world he held dear. The music box in the living room had cycled countless times. Asher, resisting the disintegration of his spirit, stumbled and fell, then finally reached the music box, clutching it tightly to his chest. Ethan and the parents, who had been listening all night, saw Asher's form growing translucent and ethereal. Ethan gasped in terror, calling Asher's name. Asher couldn't hear their words, only saw their mouths opening and closing. He grasped Ethan's hand, asking haltingly about Muffin. Ethan, his eyes swollen and red from endless tears, shook his head. Asher understood. Muffin was gone. In the distance, a faint meow echoed. Asher saw a tiny Muffin nudging open the front door, golden sunlight spilling onto the path ahead. A warm sensation, the air sweet with promise. He held the music box, smiling wistfully, asking the cat if it had come to take him away. Muffin meowed, then scampered away, looking back as if to ask why Asher wasn't running. He could bask in the sun if he just went outside. Asher staggered to his feet, pushing away Ethan's hands and the comforting hands of both sets of parents, and ran directly towards the light. He ran and ran, faster and faster, his dissipating spirit trailing behind him like a victorious cape. The sunlight and Muffin embraced him. The bells of freedom rang, parting the clouds, and a crane cried out. Ethan and Mrs. Thompson, along with the others, chased after him, only to see the sun slowly rise in the distance, and Asher, smiling, vanish beyond the yard. The music box dropped to the ground, the cycle of life broken. The summer solstice wind blew, long and fruitful, carrying the scent of flowers and the ash of spent blooms. Ethan suddenly thought, it was for the best. Asher was no longer Asher. The ashes of night were gone. The rising sun would take their place.